You want to be able to be heard, to be seen, to like connect with someone. But there's a giant gaping hole in that ability, which has all of your fears validated, especially when someone messes up.
They know how to cope just within their own orbit, meaning them and themselves, but they don't know how to regulate in the dynamics of a relationship, which is why they need the distance. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
And it's Amelia.
Welcome to another episode of Evolve Ventures, where we are helping growth-minded humans evolve by breaking one limiting belief at a time. We hope you enjoyed the last episode, number 245, Motivation Monday. What are your love languages? For today, number 246, Understanding Your Avoidant Attachment. So this is kind of the third in a three-part series, I would say. So the first episode that we did on this was talking about just the differences in attachment styles. We did one about the anxious attachment, and now we're going to be diving into the avoidant attachment. And this is going to be a little different of an episode. I'm going to be interviewing Amelia in this because she, as we mentioned in the last episode we did on this, is conditioned as an avoidantly attached person. That was her conditioning, and she's done a lot of work to become more secure. But the second reason we're doing this is because, aside from Amelia, I haven't seen it. A lot of people who are avoidantly attached and who have an avoidant attachment, they don't have the emotional intelligence yet to be able to actually talk about the experience of it, because as we're going to talk about, the avoidantly attached person is very disconnected from their emotions and from their feelings, and they really can't communicate what's going on. It's really just you have an experience and you shut down. So this will be a really good episode, number one, for anybody who is avoidantly attached and is really trying to find the words to explain what their experience has been and how to get out of it. And number two, for someone who is more anxiously attached or securely attached, to be able to understand what's going on with the avoidantly attached person. Because I think there's this really deep misunderstanding about it. And if you're anxious, you're likely to assume it's something wrong with you. Yeah. And not looking at this person is really struggling with their own experience, and here's why. So I think to get us started, can you describe what the avoidant attachment is and where it comes from?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I go into that, I will preface. So avoidant attachment styles, what I've seen is that the biggest struggle is vulnerability. So if you're someone that has struggled with vulnerability, you're likely kind of in this bucket of you've had a conditioning where avoidant attachment style was safe for you to be seen. It allowed you to feel soothed and actually like ultimately able to survive. And so if we talk about just prevalence, before I talk about like the experience and what it is, when I was looking at like the most recent statistic around this, I actually don't know if this is fully true, and I don't think I believe it, but the prevalence around avoidant attachment styles is around 25 to 30% of the population, which I actually think it's more, but I think that a lot of people don't go into these worlds of self-awareness and stay away from psychology like the plague. So anyways, I'll just put that out there. So when it comes to like the last couple episodes that we've been doing on this, in opposition of anxious attachment styles, avoidant attachment styles are in the insecure bucket as well. But in opposition to that anxious attachment style, what avoidant attachment styles represent is essentially a high degree of avoidance when it comes to getting attached. And they have low anxiety when it comes to attaching with others, whereas the anxious attachment is the flip. right? So they have high anxiety when it comes to attachment to others and low avoidance. So they're easy to jump into relationships, right? It's the complete opposite for an avoidant attachment style. So one of the things that I'll share with in my experience is obviously like my own, but I also want to share that I've coached a lot of avoidant attachment styles and seen a lot of avoidant tendencies in my practice. And what I constantly hear the feeling of that is, and what that looks like is very in alignment with B, what you had talked about, which is ultimately a giant fear of abandonment. A giant fear of abandonment and not feeling seen, not being able to soothe, and not able to be seen and safe in that being seen. And one of the biggest reasons why that is contributing to, when you do meet someone that's more avoidant attachment style, they do struggle to articulate their emotions. They do struggle to actually develop an emotional vocabulary as concerted as we develop an understanding for our ABCs.
When you meet an avoidantly attached person, they give off this aura of confidence and self-reliance. And the truth is, it's fake, and it's not real confidence, and it's not real independence. It's this learned and conditioned hyper individualism because they learned that they can't rely on anybody else. They have the same exact fear as someone with an insecure attachment. I'm going to be hurt. I'm going to be abandoned. I can't trust that love is safe. The difference is their reaction to that. Someone with an anxious attachment style jumps in and clings on and is like, don't leave me. Let me do whatever it takes to keep you here. Someone with an avoidant attachment is like, let me put a barrier between you and I. Keep your distance. You are not safe. I'm going to be abandoned. Yeah. And if you have two people who are in a relationship, an avoidant and an anxiously attached person, they're likely to pull away first, the avoidantly attached person, because they start getting into it. They start having emotions come up. It triggers their deepest fears. And then they pull away, they run away because it is terrifying. The fear of, what if I get abandoned? What if I get hurt? What if this person hurts me? So I'm going to leave and hurt myself because I know I can handle that than if this person hurts me, because that I can't handle.
Yeah. So as a conditioned avoidant attachment individual, you learn at a very young age that you're better off self-soothing, because essentially your environment and the people that care for you don't know actually how to care for you. And oftentimes what I see in this arena is that from an emotional needs standpoint, your emotional needs are really not met. And so there's a lot of emotional neglect when it comes to the insecure attachment styles, not just the avoidant, but what I have experienced is that constant need to self-soothe.
Can I ask you something though? Are they actually self-soothing, or are they just avoiding? Because I've yet to meet people, especially avoidantly attached people, who actually know how to adaptively self-soothe. They just know the things that make their attachment system calm down. But like, are they actually adaptively self-soothing, or is it that they just need that distance and space to like get back to what's familiar and known to them?
Right. And this is what's interesting, because I guess if you really want to pinpoint it, one could theorize, and there's a lot of data that you could show that confirms this, that the chicken before the egg analogy, that's kind of where this lies, where initially when you're really, really young, you learn that gaining distance is actually a benefit, and that does end up syncing up your central nervous system, that allows you to be safe. So in that conditioned learning pattern, what you end up doing once you have gained proximity is actually coping. So it's a little combination of both. You cope adaptively after that and self-soothe by default of you gaining that distance. And that's what's really hard for an anxious attachment style to understand, because it's the direct opposite. And that's why anxious attachment styles tend to trigger avoidant attachment styles. Like for me, growing up, I would constantly be attracting anxious attachment styles. And to this day, I actually have a partnership. We're very much secure now, but there are moments where that conditional attachment style comes back in. And Alan, my partner, and B, you're also conditioned and anxious. So there will be points where the anxious attachment will seek proximity, seek reassurance. And that actually triggers the central nervous system conditional patterns of someone seeking proximity to me is not going to be safe. And so there's a narrative that then gets built where understanding very few people actually can have the emotional capacity to self-soothe in an adaptive way to where their functioning can actually work towards more secure. So to your point, there are fewer avoidant attachment styles that know how to adaptively and effectively cope. And that's where I think that I'm an outlier here, because I've really gone inwardly and learned how to self-soothe and really gone down that curious arena as to the why. And then, fell in love with psychology and fell in love with emotional intelligence and really cultivated my skill set. More often than not, though, the avoidant attachment styles will seek distance. And that in itself is their own version of coping, but it's not actually adaptive.
They know how to cope just within their own orbit, meaning them and themselves, but they don't know how to regulate in the dynamics of a relationship, which is why they need the distance.
Right.
There's this belief, and I used to have this belief too. A lot of anxiously attached people think that avoidantly attached people have it easier. That it's like, oh, it must be nice. You're just confident and you don't need anyone and you're not feeling anything. And you and I have talked about this a lot. That is a massive myth. Avoidantly attached people are suffering and struggling and are hurting and in pain the same way that an anxiously attached person is. The difference is that avoidant people numb the living hell out of it.
And so that's why you don't find that emotional agility developed. And that's where a lot of the coaching that I'm doing is to kind of unlock those emotional centers that have been like stomped out. Because if you were vulnerable, that was actually a threat to your existence, your survival at a very young age.
Absolutely.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to jump on here. My name is Julie, and I wanted to give a huge shout out to Evolve Ventures and to my coaching with Bianca. I'm like many of you. It's like I've read all the books, positivity, the glass is half full, it's not half empty. Tried to get myself away from negative people, tried to think positive thoughts, suffered from depression, on medications, tried everything, counseling. Tried so many different things, and it helped, but I never felt like I got to the root of the problem. And I started listening to Evolve Ventures, amazing. And then I did a free coaching with Bianca and thought, what could it hurt? It's free, right? Oh my gosh, that day changed my life. I blurted out to Bianca things that I had never even really thought about myself. And I ended up setting up coaching with her. And I know so many of us say, oh, we can't afford coaching. But let me tell you, that coffee that you drink, that cupcake that you have, those cookies that you buy, that restaurant you go to, all those little things to make you feel better, you can take all of that and put it aside and invest in yourself. Use that money to invest in you, because you don't need those cookies to feel happy anymore. You don't need those restaurants to feel happy anymore. When you know how to be happy yourself, how to make yourself happy. And it's not all great. Every day is fine, but I can now acknowledge things. I can acknowledge why I feel the way I do, and I can work through it without having to feel like there is no help. People are great. I definitely recommend Evolve Ventures and Bianca.
You're not better off being one or the other. They both have their struggles and their problems. And if you're avoidantly attached, you don't ever really, unless you actually let yourself do the work, you don't ever actually build a healthy relationship with your emotions. You don't ever build a healthy relationship with other people, and you're left feeling alone and isolated for the majority of your life unless and until you actually do this work. And you've experienced this. So like, what does it feel like in that moment when you're triggered and just shut down? Because you and I have talked about this. Someone who's anxious, it makes no sense. Like, how do you just shut your emotions off? How do you just like not feel? Like, what do you mean?
Right.
You just turn it off.
It's so fascinating, genuinely, because, and it's fascinating to also hear other people's stories in this. So I hope that my experience isn't just sharing, you know, and helping our listeners to understand me more, but it's also helping the avoidant attachment styles, or those who are experiencing avoidant tendencies, whether that be within themselves or maybe in their partner or maybe in their family members, right? They can actually see what's happening behind the scenes. And what that really feels like is there's a giant, so picture a giant belief that like every person that exists, you can't trust them. You're constantly learning this narrative that no one that enters into your orbit, no matter how close they are to you, best friends, intimate partners that say they love you, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, people that say they love you, you have an unconscious distrust of that. So there's a wedge that you have to kind of live with constantly. And it's almost like you experience, I've often heard it like a rope around your neck a little bit. So anytime you do try to express yourself, it's always met with someone trying to jump down your throat or pull that rope a little bit tighter, to where your expression of your experience, even as you work through the wanting to trust someone but feeling like you can't, it gets tighter and tighter. And so a lot of avoidant attachment styles that I resonate with and that resonate with me, it's like there's the constant build within the chest and within the chakra arena that you want to be able to be heard, to be seen, to like connect with someone. But there's a giant gaping hole in that ability, which has all of your fears validated, especially when someone messes up. So from an anxious attachment style learning the avoidant, it's number one, you learn very quickly that you can't trust anyone. So you learn by force to be and rely upon yourself and no one else. And that becomes a very isolating world. And so your entire worldview ends up getting really dark, quite frankly. Because if you can't trust people, then what does that mean about the world? Is the world a good place? Is it a place that you should want to be a part of? Now, some of us fight to get better and fight to make a world a better place where you can trust people, when you can seek comfort, when you can connect with others from a vulnerable space and not get hurt by that. Oftentimes, avoidant attachment styles experience in that moment what's called the disassociation. And I've had people joking about that, where it's just by default, you go into, it's kind of like a shutdown mode, where in order to protect yourself, you literally disconnect from your body. So you have kind of an out of body experience when you're with people. So the loneliness, talk about that. You can be in a room full of people who want to get close to you, and there's a part of you that is trying to actually, in recognizing that closeness, deeming that as a threat, trying to push itself away and trying to disassociate and trying to do anything to get away from the pull that's trying to chase you. And so it's a weird experience where you start to shut down and get away. That's just constantly the narrative that you're trying to honor, because you have so much evidence to show you that if you didn't do that, something really bad was going to happen, right? So trying to shift from an avoidant to a secure very much looks like understanding what were those moments for you that did validate that narrative. And then also working to rebuild and regain trust within yourself to not disassociate in uncomfortable moments, to navigate conflict in a healthy, positive way, to actually meet your needs because you're learning that they're worthy of being met, of listening to, of hearing, and so I could go on, but it looks like, short answer, you distrust people, you shut down, and you run like hell to gain proximity, or to gain distance rather.
And from what I've heard from clients and from what I've heard from you, it's not even a conscious process. Like, you're not consciously saying, oh my God, I'm scared, let me shut down. It just happens without your control and without any,
I would say consent.
Without your consent, it just happens. So for anyone listening to this who is avoidantly attached and wants to learn how to stop that process so they can actually feel, what would you recommend to them? Like, how do they start doing that?
Yeah. Number one, I am such an advocate, and this is what I'll do in my coaching, is really making sure that you do have a place to feel heard, to develop trust, and to be seen so that you can actually soothe. So like, for example, one of the biggest, most simple ways of going about a baby step around this is a journal. I was speaking with a client who is avoidant attachment style, and I said, you can abandon a journal, right? Because in that journal, you're going to be learning about yourself. You're going to be answering prompts about like what came up for me today. Where did I not feel trust? Like, in journaling prompts that definitely trigger you to self-analyze from a place of compassion, this condition attachment style. You can abandon a journal. Say, for example, it's not perfect or it's not what you want it to be. It doesn't have a lock, whatever, but never abandon yourself. And what I mean by that is make sure that you're heard. When you're an avoidant attachment style, you learn to be quiet, to be small, to get away, to move away from any spotlight. And when you start associating that narrative with every single behavior that you operate from, that is a really self-destructive mechanism. So when you have a journal, which is my recommended step number one from an avoidant attachment style, you start to recognize some of your patterns. And the step number two to that is learning with someone who is actually safe and has your best interest at heart, be it a coach, be it a therapist, be it an incredibly emotionally regulated friend, someone who has the emotional vocabulary more than you. That could be a specific author that you just know sees you in this, that's been through it, that understands attachment styles. Use that voice of reason to help you rewire and recondition, because essentially you're fighting against a ton of unconscious narratives. Shut down, distrust, and run away, right? That you need someone in your corner to help you work through that, just like I've needed my entire life. Number one was myself. Number two was all of my mentors. And then number three, what I would really, really recommend for people with avoidant attachment styles is to understand how you impact the world. For example, if I'm in a relationship, I didn't realize it at the time. Now I'm very clear. A lot of the way in which I approached the world ended up hurting people and had a really detrimental impact to some people who were on the anxious attachment style. And when you can understand the impact of when you're, for lack of better words, asleep, because no one taught you about this stuff, because no one encouraged you to do the work, because no one laid a path for you to do the work, you recognize that a lot of the regrets that you have, or the areas of shame or guilt, you recognize it was because you were unintentionally hurtful to someone else that you cared for. And I think when you can really process through that, you tend to have an opportunity to release yourself from any guilt, any blame, any shame, and it gives you a massive opportunity to do things differently, to move to a secure attachment style, and to break that cycle before you have children if you choose to break that cycle so that you can repair relationships, whether it be family or friends. And it gives you an opportunity to, I don't want to say absolve your sins, but it's really not like that, because none of them are sins. It's more so to give yourself the recognition that no one could really give you, and you just struggled to gain, right? So that's what I would give any avoidant attachment style, and what I certainly would give my younger self had I had me in her corner.
Episode suggestion and final takeaway.
My episode suggestion is going to be 207. Is your attachment style hurting you? Likely the answer is yes, in some capacity. We just need to have the humility to understand how. And my final takeaway would be to honestly understand how important it is for our own longevity and creating a better place for us to be more aware of what our avoidant attachment style does to people and how that impacts people. You know, because if there's someone internalizing you avoiding them and you really love and care about them, you know, that can have a really big impact. And though it's not your responsibility to control how they behave and how they perceive, it is, I believe, our duty to understand ourselves so that we can have at least a fighting chance to do things differently, to choose differently, and at least to lead others differently. What about you, B?
122, why do I feel so insecure? And my final takeaway is for anyone who's listening to this, who's an anxious attachment style, who is kind of looking to understand why the avoidant people in their life are acting the way that they are and why things might have happened the way that they did. I hope this helped you to get some clarity around that. And now this isn't to justify their behavior, right? It's not to say, oh, they're hurting, so it's okay that they did what they did. No. But it is to help you see that it's not because of you.
Yeah.
Their behavior is not because of you and you not being enough. It's their way of protecting themselves. Just like your way of protecting yourself is to cling on.
Mm-hmm.
When we can understand each other better and when we can understand ourselves better, we can form much more healthy, adaptive, and secure relationships. And this is a really good first step into that. So that is what I will say about that. We hope that this episode was valuable to you. We hope you took so much from it away. And we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.